Pat Smith, three-man front, WJOX, a monster station, Birmingham, joins us, 365 Sports. Always great to have Pat with us on the show with Paul, Catalina, Craig, and David Smoak. Pat, thanks for your time. I saw the graphic, Bet Online on the college football playoff, and one of the things we discussed is how many teams are listed. Everybody would be listed, even if it was 10,000 to 1. But because of the number of teams that can make the playoff, it just opens up so many others that have a chance to be a legitimate shot of being involved, don't you think?
Absolutely. And first off, guys, always a pleasure to be on with y'all. But let me tell you something. The thing that happened that was crazy, and we just got to get used to it, especially in my neck of the woods, is the fact that we're not used to seeing Alabama the 15th best odds of making anything, especially when it comes to football.
Mm-hmm.
This is something we have not seen since 2007, guys, that was the second year of, Nick Saban coming into the capstone, doing what he did on an amazing run. But to look ahead and see the likes of Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss, Tennessee ahead of Alabama on that list, it was a big shock to the system for a lot of guys in my neck of the woods.
How nervous will people be until they see what Kalen DeBoer can actually do? I doubt spring football is going to put them at ease.
Well, I'll tell you what, one thing's for sure, we had 99,000 show up for a spring game when Nick Saban first came to Tuscaloosa. It might be a record crowd to see what this offense and what Kalen DeBoer can do because they start Monday. That's when spring practice starts at Tuscaloosa. But there's been a lot of nervousness, especially with that list of coaches that he thought was going to come with him from Seattle. A couple of guys ended up going back to Seattle, to the Seattle Seahawks, and so all of a sudden he had to go maybe second and third down his list. I know a couple of names that's probably very familiar with you guys there in Waco that are now going to reside in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So, but he was able to keep in his stable a 5-star wide receiver, the number one player in the state of Alabama. He was committed to Alabama for a very long time. He decommitted the day Nick Saban retired. Auburn was hot on his heel. Hugh Freeze has done a great job recruiting, but Kalen DeBoer was able to come in, calm the waters, finish off the signing class, get that 5-star wide receiver. So that's made the fan base a little bit more easy, but guys, don't be fooled for a second. The bar is so high here. And a lot of people say, why in the world would Kalen DeBoer want to leave the great Pacific Northwest and come to the hotbed of the SEC and come to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, coming after the greatest coach of all time in college football? Well, he said it best. He says, this is the opportunity that's going to be able to test me as a coach. And it's going to test his patience with the fans. There's no doubt about that.
Pat, there is a void being left. I mean, no matter how good Kalen DeBoer is, it's hard to imagine anybody can be as good as Saban was, obviously. And we see there's this hole now for any number of SEC teams, including the two that are joining this summer, to try and fill. But Ole Miss in particular has been very aggressive this offseason. Not the first time we've seen them be active, but it just seems like they're really going for it. What have you made of Ole Miss's offseason thus far?
Well, I tell you what, one thing's for sure, when you're involved in the recruiting trail around the SEC, it's been no secret that Lane Kiffin, even when he was in Tuscaloosa at Alabama, he didn't like to go out and recruit a lot. So when the transfer portal came into existence, that's why he's the transfer portal king, because he can kind of sit back. It's like going to Walmart, get your groceries, get your oil changed. That's what the transfer portal is for Lane Kiffin, because he doesn't have to go out and have those bad meals and sit in dens and listen to grandmas and grandpas tell stories about how great their grandson is. He is going to the portal. He's being able to get the kids he wants. And because Ole Miss has done a really good job with the Grove Collective and NIL, that they've been able to go out and kind of circumnavigate the high school recruiting so they could go out and get what they need to build that roster. Like, heck, today, you had Jackson Dart become the first player in the history of college football to sign an NIL deal with a private jet company. He is going to have access to a private jet for philanthropy, for his training. If he wants to go, let's go to Destin for the weekend at the Gulf Coast, he's got access to it. So they're doing it right in Oxford. It's time for the likes of the Georgias and the Alabamas and the Auburns to try to catch up, because Lane Kiffin is really far in advance. He's put together a pretty nice roster.
I think that's so far, we've seen Bijan with a Lamborghini, and I'm sure others now, and there are a lot of money out there. But is this the best individual NIL hit you think, with Dart and a private jet?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. Whether it's Carson Beck, getting a fancy car in Atlanta, or with it, obviously it was, what Texas seems to do with, whether it's Isaiah Bond, the transfer who came over from Tuscaloosa to Austin, getting a new car, things of that nature. But this just raises the level. Obviously, we already knew that Nico at Tennessee was getting access to a private jet, hence the reason we've got lawsuits against the NCAA. But that just raises the bar for the Quinn Ewers and the other quarterbacks in the league, saying, hey, Jackson Dart was the fifth best quarterback in the SEC last year. I think I deserve a private jet. So all of a sudden, the bar is raised so high. The games in the SEC, it used to be behind closed doors. Now it's just open for everyone to see. But there's no doubt that they have just made everybody else in the SEC go, uh-oh, we're going to have to up our game now.
Yeah, how many private jet companies have that much interest, though, in a particular school, right? Like that's maybe something that some of these have looked into.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. But I think in the SEC, and you guys being in the state of Texas where everything seems to be bigger out there, I think it goes without saying the Texas A&Ms, even the Baylors will be able to, they've got enough great alumni that they'll do whatever is necessary for their quarterbacks or their star running back, wide receiver, DB, whatever the case may be. But I'm telling you guys, if we thought the Wild Wild West was already here based on what took place in East Tennessee over the weekend on Friday in regards to what happened with that lawsuit and the injunction, we haven't seen anything yet.
So Charlie Baker had some quotes. We had 2 or 3 of them, graphics up on the show. And it seems to be, again, that there's nothing the NCAA is doing. They're maybe trying to win lawsuits, and they're not even doing that, or injunctions, et cetera. Pat, did Friday's decision kill them? It's just a matter of when they're going to be taken off whatever the respirator is?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think the hole has been dug, and they're waiting to place the body in the bottom of it. Yeah, I mean, listen, unless the federal government is going to step in on this, this better than anybody, guys. Nothing is going to happen. There's bigger problems in Washington, D.C. than to deal with an archaic NCAA system that they're trying to hide behind amateurism. Amateurism has been dead for a very long time, especially when it comes to college football. So they're just propping this up right now. Hopefully with Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti, with this, I'm not going to use the word alliance because we know what happened the last time that word was used. But these two guys are two of the smartest guys that you're going to find in college athletics. And they are bound to determine that, not only are we going to go in these CFP meetings and we're going to say, we're going to flex our muscle, but we're now going to flex our muscle more towards Charlie Baker. I don't think there's any question that the SEC and the Big Ten, they don't want to run NCAA championships. They don't want to run men's soccer or the track championships. But when you do look at the college football playoff and you look at the big dollar signs that goes behind the men's college basketball, they're looking for change. Greg Sankey sat as a chairperson for a group about a year ago where they threw out the idea of having, hundreds of teams participate in March Madness in the college basketball. That's something that I know that he has been very active in. And I think him and Tony Petitti have had enough. And those two conferences are going to sit there and they're probably going to tell Charlie Baker, you guys better do this, because if you don't, you could see the Power Four split away, or heck, when it's all said and done, the SEC and the Big Ten can go off and do their own thing. How
concerned are you about that future of the ACC and Big 12 getting left out of anything?
Well, I tell you what, I think you need to pay attention to what happens next February with the ACC, because the ACC and the ESPN, they have the grant of rights in the television contract. Well, next February, I believe ESPN has a look in on that contract. Mm-hmm. And at that point in time, they can make a decision whether they want to move forward and carry this out through 2036. So what happens if ESPN comes back and says, okay, guys, you know what? With everything going on in the world, we're going to get out of this. We're not going to have the ACC network. We're done. At that time, everybody becomes free agents. So then what happens to the Florida States, the Clemsons, the North Carolinas, the Virginias, or anybody else that has any value left in that conference? Then they're going to find themselves elsewhere. I think the Big 12 is in great shape. I think Brett Yormark has done a phenomenal job. The way that he outflanked our good friend George Kliakoff on the West Coast, it was tremendous the way he outmaneuvered him. Klykop was trying to go toe-to-toe with his back and forth, the verbal barrage, and Yormark just ate his lunch. And at the end of the day, the Big 12 is on solid footing, more solid footing, in my opinion, than the ACC. So Yormark's done a great job. I think when it's all said and done, you will have the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC, and whatever the remnants are of an ACC. Those will be your power players moving forward in college football.
Pat, it's kind of switching gears a little bit. They're close to home there for you, the Auburn Tigers. I was curious about just post-Alabama and Saban and wide-open SEC outside of, pluck Georgia there or put Georgia right there at the top and the rest of it figure out. But what's sort of the feel around Hugh Freeze in year two and changes on staff and taking over play calling, all the different measures they've taken since last season? What's the temperature around Auburn, Alabama right now?
Well, it's interesting because one of the major discussions we had today, because they start spring practice today. And so, FanDuel has their win total at 7.5. And so many people in our state, they believe that this is an 8, possibly even a 9-win team this season, just the way that their schedule kind of rounds out. But one thing's for sure, Hugh has completely redone this staff. He is basically going to take over more of the play calling duties on offense. He brings in Derek Nix, someone that he knew very well at Ole Miss. On the defensive side, a name that you guys are familiar with from Texas A&M, DJ Durkin is going to be the defensive coordinator. So they've got some holes to fill, but one thing Hugh has done a really good job of is he has gotten in the back pocket of both Alabama and Georgia when it comes to recruiting. He took a 5-star away from Alabama, took a 5-star away from Georgia. He has been very active in the Florida Panhandle. He has basically rebuilt their power when it comes to high school recruiting, something that Brian Harsin single-handedly destroyed. Hugh Freeze knows the SEC. He knows how to recruit. He has good relationships, and that's paid dividends on the recruiting trail now. Can he develop this talent? And the biggest question for all college football coaches, can you keep them in your system? Can you keep them on campus without them getting in the transfer portal? But a lot of excitement for Auburn this year.
So how has he not been able to get a quarterback yet?
Well, you know what? He will tell you, not privately, but he'll tell you behind the microphone that the system that he wants to run, and let's just be honest, there are certain budgets that they have when it comes to NIL. And Auburn felt the need to spend the NIL monies elsewhere on that roster development, not at the quarterback. Now, they've got these 5-star wide receivers coming in. They're going to have to find somebody to be able to get the ball to them. Now, Peyton Thorne is supposedly right now your quarterback one, but Walker White, an outstanding quarterback. He's a freshman coming in from Arkansas. He's going to get a ton of looks this spring. Don't be surprised if he doesn't push Peyton Thorne, and he could be a guy that could shock everybody when we get to SEC Media Days in Dallas, that Walker White might be the guy coming out of spring, might be the number one guy.
So, Pat, when you look at where we are now, Charlie Baker's quotes, we've discussed that. What is next? What do you think is next? Instead of quotes like politicians, which is what he is, and also one of the reasons he was brought aboard, what is next? Is there going to be a day we actually look up and they're no longer doing that? They're just not there.
I think there will always be a need for the NCAA because you do have to have some type of rules. It's just they're going to continue to run their so-called championships and some tournaments, or maybe what you would say the non-traditional or non-producing revenue sports. You will have them being in charge of that. But at the end of the day, their power is gone. I mean, the National Labor Relations Board, they're continuing to slap them around, whether it's at Dartmouth, whether it's going to be in Los Angeles, with that lawsuit that is continuing to go on as we speak. So at the end of the day, I think the NCAA is basically going to be an organization that will run tournaments. I mean, they'll be like your local travel ball or, your AAU that will run these type of tournaments. But as opposed to the big boys and trying to make decisions or go to your campus and put you on probation for lack of institutional control, I think those days are completely gone. There will be some form of NCAA. It just will not be what we grew up, dreading if you got some type of letter or an investigator showing up on your campus. Those days are long gone.
Earlier, we discussed Sanki and Petiti, and there are Autonomy 4 conferences now because of what happened to the Pac-12. Do you? We see either Petiti or Sanki read quotes about how they want to do what's best for the ecosystem. Do you, in your time around them, especially Sanki, do you think they really care about the ecosystem, or do they care about just their own conference?
I can tell you from a Greg Sankey standpoint, and knowing Greg Sankey before when he was Mike Slide's right-hand guy, and then when he took over this conference, he really does care about intercollegiate athletics. He really does care about the whole ecosystem, so to speak. But don't make a mistake. He has been extremely frustrated, especially the fact that the Alliance screwed up the college football playoff. Guys, we could have had a college football playoff last year with 12 teams. Now, how exciting would that have been? We wouldn't have had the whole Florida State fiasco. They would have had an opportunity, probably not gone very far, but they would have been in. But instead, you had the likes of the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Pac-12 screwing everything up. That really got to him because he said in those meetings, he had all those clandestine meetings with other commissioners trying to make things happen, make things work. And at the end of the day, everybody was serving their own masters, not the grand scheme. And so he really does care about everybody else. But at the end of the day, I think him and Petiti both now realize that enough's enough, and they're going to have to flex their muscle. So if there is going to be some shrapnel or friendly fire, so to speak, at the end of the day, I think that, hey, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be put in the best situation possible. But Greg Sankey does care about the overall health of all of intercollegiate athletics. It's just now he's having to take a bigger stand on some items than in the past. He would have kind of let it play out by itself.
I'd love to know some of the text messages and maybe a phone call or two that early on when he threw he lobbed a couple of grenades at Brett Yormark during the time when the Big 12 and the Pac-12 were kind of having their back and forth. But I think Yormark's one of those that, hey, he's got a guy, right, Paul? He's got a guy, too. And I think it's going to be good in the end. Hopefully everything works out for everybody involved. Pat, great stuff as always. Thanks for what you do.
Hey, guys, always appreciate it. Have a great afternoon.
Pat Smith, co-host of Three Man Front, also PD program director of WJOX Radio